So I'm going to start by formally welcoming everybody. This is, of course, the last of the webinars that we're running this summer, and we are so grateful to everybody who's given up time to join us and to help us present and to help us bring these to you guys. I'm Nat Paul. I'm OJEN's Director of Educator Support. I'm co-presenting today with Michelle Thompson, who's right there. She's helped with every part of this series. And we have with us as well, Christy Pagnuti, who is running all of the behind the scenes stuff. So all of the messaging and so forth is coming through Christy. Raris Azara has done all the graphic design and helped build the registration function. So she's keeping us running smoothly and looking good. And I especially want to note the contributions of the two fantastic high school students who we had working with us in the summer through the Law in Action Within Schools program. If anybody here has been a teacher of either Kelly Chung or Nina Patel, you should know that they were a real pleasure to work with, and we're so pleased to have had them. Maybe the only evil-hearted pleasure I've taken from the current situation with COVID has been all the parents who have all of a sudden got this like newfound appreciation for teachers' work, right? You know, now who's just a glorified babysitter, eh, Karen? I could spend like the whole hour listening to you guys talk about how you're going back to work and how you feel about it. I'd actually love to do that, but we're not going to. I do just want to sort of underscore though, how much respect we have for the poise and the care and the flexibility that you guys have shown as teachers. Given how crazily last year ended, it's probably hard to forget that it started under a cloud too, with tensions and issues with the ministry and labor, and then all of a sudden COVID came and nobody paid attention to that anymore. In my house, of course, I've seen firsthand the stress that this has caused, and I really do hope you've had some rest. I think we all don't know exactly what's going to be happening over the next few weeks, so we're just playing it by ear, as many of you are. A couple of housekeeping points. If you have questions or comments, please use the Q&A function. Christy will catch them. If there are any links we need to share, we're going to post them in chat. We're generally leaving discussion for the end. And the presentation, I'll remind you, is being recorded. We will post the video and PowerPoints to our website so that you'll be able to download them if you'd like to. So at this point, I want to acknowledge and give our thanks to the traditional stewards of this land, where the three of us are, and many of you are as well in Toronto. Specifically, that's the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, and the Huron and Wendat peoples. In fact, that we have participants representing many, many different treaties. So you may be interested in a great web resource that actually Michelle found called nativeland.ca. It has an interactive map where you can learn about the nations and languages and treaties in your own area. And it's really great for reminding students that Indigenous people are a really diverse group. If you look at the map of different languages that are spoken, it's absolutely astonishing. Most of what we're talking about today is related to the pandemic, in that a lot of it is the result of us thinking about how we could best support remote learning and teaching. At the intersection of law and geography, I think it's important to acknowledge the disproportionate toll that the pandemic has had on Indigenous people in Ontario and Canada, in both urban and rural centers and northern communities. Certainly poverty is part of this problem, but we should recall that in many of these communities, it's not at all the first time a public health crisis has been exacerbated by persistent lack of clean and usable water, and note that Indigenous activists have been drawing attention to this for quite a long time. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and begin. Let me just pull up PowerPoint here and start to share. Okay, so you guys should be able to see my PowerPoint up there. Is that the case? Okay, great. I'm having a very slow responding PowerPoint problem here. Of course. There we go. All right, here we are. All very official looking. Okay, so the session today is called New from OJEN, Tools, Resources, and Programs to Support Remote Teaching. That's what we're mostly focusing on. Me and Michelle are going to pass back and forth. We're going to talk first about new and upcoming resources. the exciting stuff in art in the courts that Michelle's been working on, courtrooms and classrooms programs and other programs, and then the crown jewel today is another one of Michelle's, the digital version of the Access to Justice game that a lot of you folks have probably played. Here's a really, really flattering picture of me at Bloor Collegiate last year. We're going to talk about new and upcoming resources. Some of you may have gotten the link already, but this is, we're going to be looking at stuff on that page there. So I'm going to just take you over to this resource page now. One second. Okay. Oopsie, sorry guys. There we are. Smooth. Okay, so some of you might remember that earlier in the year, we set aside a dedicated area of our website for stuff that was going to be specific to COVID. This is still the case, and this is mostly what we're working off of today. You'll see that we've distinguished between stuff that's OJEN teaching resources and stuff that is external resources. I'm going to just quickly look at that first. Here we have been building a collection of resources from partners. So we have a whole bunch of great stuff from other organizations like Facing History, the Justice Education Society in BC, and a bunch of other things. So this is here. We also, for French, for colleagues working in French, Thomas Galazot, who some of you will know, has put together a great resource of resources in French. So that's there. We'll go quickly back now and look at OJEN's teaching resources. So this is where we've been putting all of the stuff that we think is the best stuff for doing immediate online teaching and learning. We think that it's probably easier if you guys can find everything in one place. So a few things to talk about here. Some of you will have seen our Steps to Justice workshops. These are the ones that engage with the Steps to Justice website from Community Legal Education Ontario. We've done some demonstrations, and I know that some of you have used them in your own classes. One of the sort of silver linings of being able to not do quite as much programming has been that we've had time to really work on resource development. So we've now got a total of about 10 here. So in addition to the ones that we had before, which were employment, criminal and family, we've added most recently immigration law, family law, or rather housing law, human rights, debt and consumer rights, health and disability, and abuse and family violence workshops. These all work in the same format. It's a very simple a hook to get people interested, explanation and demonstration of how the website works, students working in small groups or individually to do individual investigations of scenario or case-based questions, and then coming back to report on it. So it's a very familiar format. We developed that format in the hopes that you would be able to eventually apply your own investigations using the same thing. But here we've got these ones all set and ready to go for you. Most interestingly, one of the things that we did is we looked at this, the workshop and decided that we could do more if we actually designed a specific modality for it to be used to present over Zoom or Google Classroom or something. So what we see right here where it says the Housing Law Online Workshop is a modified version of this that walks you through how to actually give this presentation using Zoom. I am aware that there are some different issues with respect to what school boards are approving of what kinds of communication tech or screen sharing tech. So one of the things that I'm really happy to work on this year, and if anybody has thoughts or interest, is developing a version of this and the instructions that work with Google Classroom. I think that would be super helpful. And we've got all of our top fives here, including the most recent top five, which has just been put out. This top five is the one that was presented last year. Oopsie, there we go. And so it's got all of those cases. And where are we here? I would say as well that in relation to this, Michelle is going to probably speak a little bit more about this, but we have our OJEN Fellows program in place as well. So this is, we've gotten all but I think 2 of the Ontario law schools, and we have students at them who are working with us, and part of what they're delivering with us this year is one in-class or virtual in-class presentation, as well as working on a resource. So we do have these students available. We are happy to work individually if this is something of interest, and you'd like to have a law student come in either in person to your class, depending on what happens, or do the presentation virtually through Zoom, that's something which we're more than happy to arrange. So that was the top 5. That was from last year.
I think, Nat, if you don't mind me jumping in just while we're talking about the fellows, I might as well say a little bit more about that. So historically, we've had these law student fellows at most of the law schools in Canada. And because of that, they've been kind of limited geographically to working with classes that are in those areas. That's not the case this year. This year it's structured differently. They're each taking one of OJEN's classroom programs and figuring out how to run it online with classes. And so as a result, we're able now to field requests from areas that we couldn't previously get to, as long as it's okay that that happens online. So we have fellows this year who are going to be prepared to deliver Steps to Justice workshops, the Access to Justice game, Justice 101s, which are sort of about roles in the justice system, My Journey to a Career in Law, which is about equity and different career paths in law, and probably a couple of others for Toronto specifically. There's also one working on street checks, which is about new provincial or Toronto-based regulations around when police can stop and basically card or ID people. So look for more information on that coming out, but if that's something that would be helpful to you, if any of those sound like they would fit well with your classroom, we don't have to be quite so constrained by geography as we have been in the past.
Yeah, that's been the name of the game, is pivot, pivot, pivot. So in some ways, I actually think it's worth saying that this has pressed us to do some things that we were always sort of needing to do. Well, now we've sort of had the time and the excuse to do it. So we've actually done some of that. I also want to call attention to the fact that all of these webinars, all of these sessions are available for you to look at and to get the materials from. This is on the same page as the one that you would have looked at to register for these webinars. If you just scroll down, you can see all of them individually. So just for example, when I click on this one, it brings up this screen, which some of you may have attended. This was the first webinar with Charlene Barehead, who was walking through her curriculum, lessons from the MMIWG inquiry. And to go along with that, we have a really interesting talk on land acknowledgements, and then a series of related resources. So we've got our own downloads in the web page, as well as the resource itself, and then a bunch of sort of cases that we think might be relevant in terms of establishing, jurisprudence and things in Aboriginal title and a bunch of related things. So that's what we've got there. And then I think the last one that I'm going to talk about here is something that we have coming up. So some of you will have used the resource Teaching Human Rights in Ontario, which is coming from the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Looks like this. One of the things that the OHRC was concerned about with this is that it's a bit out of date and very, very, very text heavy. This thing is like 100 pages long, and some of you will know that. So we've actually entered into a partnership with the OHRC to develop a much more agile version of this resource. So this is one which is going to be typically or chiefly designed for the grade 10 civics class, but also useful for anybody who's interested in human rights in law classes or social justice classes. And it's going to culminate with a really fun activity, which is a mock human rights tribunal hearing. So that's coming out. We should be, and actually I'm fairly sure that some of the people who are in attendance today have volunteered to help with this, which is great. We're going to be looking at piloting this starting in probably the end of September. So you should keep aware of announcements for that kind of thing. And I think that's about it for the resources. We're going to flip this over to Michelle now, who's going to talk about art in the courts. You can grab the screen. Mike. You're still on mute.
There we go. You should have my PowerPoint hopefully up right now. I had planned for that to be so smooth, and the best laid plans, that's the theme of this year. So those of you who sort of come to SLI every year will have seen us talk about this resource before. I think I've been at SLI the last 2 years talking about different versions of this. Art in the Courts is a website that we have put together to house a couple of different projects that sort of engage in this cross-section between art and the courts. And we have finally completed it. And so what I really want to show you today is both that we have a final site, and I want to show you our new content because some of it is actually pretty good. So Art in the Courts houses a couple of different projects. One of them is we post the art that's submitted through the Grade 5 Poster Challenge, which is a project where we invite Grade 5 classes to make a poster that illustrates what they love about the charter. And we have regional competitions, and the winning art gets displayed in a local courthouse. It's really cool. So under the art section of this website, which you can see, I've put the sort of front page of it up on the screen. We have all those past winners. But the two things that I really want to highlight for today are the McMurtry Gardens of Justice virtual tour and the new content on the Osgoode Hall virtual tour. So we've shown the whole McMurtry Gardens of Justice at SLI before, and I'm not going to recap all of that. But if you happen to not be there for that stuff, the McMurtry Gardens of Justice are a sculpture garden that is out the back of Osgoode Hall in Toronto, which houses the Law Society of Ontario and the Court of Appeal for Ontario, and the courthouse at 393 University, which houses a bunch of different court buildings. It's a sculpture garden that's been built over the last about 15 years, and all of it is themed around important concepts in law and justice in Canada. So this began long before COVID hit. But one of the sort of fortuitous, serendipitous things that has happened is we happen to now be able to substitute in-person tours for this virtual tour that we have. And so just like, if you've been to the AGO or any, big museums that have sort of audio guides or virtual tours that you can click through, you can navigate to sculpture, get information about the artists, about the ideas behind the work, click on specific hotspots and get sort of popped out content about those features. And it's pretty cool. We know that there have been teachers who have used the McMurtry Gardens of Justice tour to help introduce students to charter rights, because there are specific focus sculptures on things like Section 50 inequality. There's one about freedom of religion, there's one about freedom of expression, and they do have a little bit of core legal content in there as well about what those rights are, sort of the way those rights have evolved over time. But the new thing that I want to show you is the Osgoode Hall tour. And I'm going to take you straight there. So last year, I think I was at SLI, here we go, talking about the virtual courtroom tours that we have for courtrooms 1 and 4. Forgive me, I'm also having allergies, which I'm sure a lot of the rest of you are as well. And I think I said last year that we were working on a virtual tour of the rest of Osgoode Hall and it would be forthcoming. It has forthcome, it is here. So I just want to show you a little bit about how that works. What you're going to find in these tours is a bit of a blend of historical and art history and architecture content with some specifics about legal function and contemporary operation of the building and the work that gets done inside it. So I just want to show you a little bit about how to navigate around this site so that if you have any interest in using this with your students, you're sort of all ready to go. So when you first access and click in, you're going to get these instructions for how to navigate on desktop. It's basically what we're going to go over right now, but it's there if you need to see it again. So you'll have in general a location. This is the grounds of Osgoode Hall. You'll see these things that are hotspots. If you click on one of these, what you'll get is a little detail view with extra photography, often they'll have more content here and some additional links about these different features. So the way that you navigate around this tour, you have two options. The first is you can use these buttons down here. Can you see where my mouse is?
Move it around a little bit.
Okay, great. That'll help. So you can use these arrows down here to sort of reproduce where you would be physically walking on this tour. So in this case, you have the option to go that way, which will take you to the fence outside Osgoode Hall. Here we go. Got some detail points on the fence. We're gonna click forward to go back into the grounds, and you can actually navigate through as if you're walking through Osgoode Hall. So I've just clicked forward. This is gonna lead me into the atrium. And if any of you have been to Osgoode Hall before, you're probably recognizing a fair bit of this. So once again, once you get into a new space, you're gonna have your hotspots and you're gonna be able to navigate where else you wanna go. The other option, which some people find simpler, just depending on how your brain works, and sometimes whether you're already familiar with the space, is up here in the top menu, you can click on floor plan. And what it'll give you instead is this selection that you can make amongst basically the different rooms or areas where we have content. So right now we're in the atrium. You can go straight to courtroom 1, jump to courtroom 4, go to the Great Library, Convocation Hall, where we historically have had summer law institutes if you've been in the past. So you can also feel free to jump around to whatever is relevant for you and is going to be helpful. One of the things I want to pause and mention here is that apart from the fact that it's kind of nice to be able to see a historical building like this, actual in-person tours of Osgoode Hall are not really being offered anymore, and that's not just because of COVID. That actually predates the outbreak of COVID. So part of why we're happy to be able to present this is that it is such a historically significant building for Ontario, and there's so much interesting work happening in it. And in this way, we've been able to work with the curator for the Law Society, who is a historian herself and has all this cool archival knowledge to be able to share a lot of that when you're not going to be able to go in person anymore. In terms of how this can work with other of OJEN's programs, there's one thing in particular that I want to highlight, and that is the content you can find in courtrooms 1 and 4. I'm going to click on 4 just because it's the more architecturally impressive of the two. So you can click on the dot or select from this menu and then just hit go. There we go. So we've got all these nice details. We've got little featurettes about the light fixture, the carving of Lady Justice, the dais. But what I think is really useful about this is both courtroom 1 and courtroom 4 are appellate level courts. They aren't ones that have trials run in them. And one of the things that is useful about that is in the content for this, we get to talk a little bit about how appeals actually work. This hotspot right here is what is an appeal. Sometimes you'll see some that are in the top left corner like this, and they tend to be just general information about what happens in this space. So we have all this like well-considered introductory level, very friendly language about how appellate stuff actually works. And if you are one of the classes that participates in OJEN's Charter Challenge every year, which is an appellate level moot process, this can be a really nice, sort of really visual, very online way to begin thinking about how appeals work and the granularity of that. So we hope that that'll provide some interesting supplemental stuff that you can do with your students. I think that's essentially it for Art in the Courts. French will be forthcoming on the site, but everything is basically up and running and ready for your use. And we'll be especially very interested in hearing if you do end up working with Art in the Courts with your students, how you used it, how they responded. We'd love to hear some more of the creative ideas that come out of your instruction.
All right, thanks, Michelle.
Back to Nats.
And I am stealing the screen because this is the most fun thing we learned to do today. And I want, which one? I want this one. Yeah, that's the one I want. Okay, so now we have to wait for my slow PowerPoint. Well, okay, I'm going to start talking and maybe the PowerPoint will catch up with me. So the Courtrooms and Classrooms programs are the sort of flagship programs that we run that link schools and the justice system in physical ways. And so this has obviously been complicated for sure for the last little while. What we do have in place is, well, I'll say, first of all, the lawyer visits to schools program. Much of this depends on what is going to happen with physical school and so forth. I know that most boards have a plan laid out. I know that some don't actually have a very good plan laid out. I know that people in the TDSB are anxiously awaiting the 4th of September because that's when it's all supposed to fall into place. But having said that, we've also developed the mechanism so that we can do lawyer visits to classes virtually. So there's no real change to the process. You still go ahead and do the request as you normally would, but when you come to that page, you'll see that there's a little bit of an extra prompt about what kind of technology is preferred if you want to do the virtual visit, just so that we can make sure that we match you up with somebody who is proficient in the technology that you'll be using. Once again, the Justice Education Fellows are also available for this. Michelle mentioned the Charter Challenge, which is great. The Charter Challenge actually is going to proceed pretty much as it did. This is because the vast majority of it is done independently. So we'll be supporting the Charter Challenge as we have done. We haven't picked a scenario yet, but we're thinking it might be something related to cell phone searches because that's something that's quite popular with young people. But that's yet to be seen. So we'll be doing that. What we did last spring was we had the Charter Challenge run, and we did have schools participating, and for the culmination of it, which is normally the best appellant response and respondent response, are invited to argue in person at the Court of Appeal. This time we instead set up a Zoom appeal, which is actually what the courts are doing. So they are fairly familiar with how this goes, and it worked really, really well. So we were pleased that it was able to come off the way that it did. And we minimally have that available, even if we have no physical capacity to be in courts. Something else that's exciting is this year we've actually got, we've won some substantial funding to do a full-length program, Défi de la Charte, which is the Charter Challenge, running in French. So this is something which my colleague Thomas Galazot is going to be running. And we're doing a full-on program for Charter Challenge for schools that are working in French, Francophone education. That's going to be coming out very soon, and we have a whole group of students who are working with us as part of the terms of the grant, so that's going to be super. Court visits is the one which is the most difficult for me to talk about because although the courts are technically open to the public, this, of course, has been a very, very strange time, and the courts have had a really difficult time adjusting to the needs, the physical needs of those cases that have to be heard in person versus those cases that can be pushed to offline and so forth. And so for the interim, we've made the decision that we are not going to support court visits at least until January, till we see what the new semester is going to look like. So while nothing has changed with respect to the court's position on this, you are still able to go and attend in person, but they have told us that it's going to be very difficult you would not expect necessarily that you were going to be able to get in or see anything that day. So this also has a good deal of regional variability to it. So for sure at this time, Toronto, Ottawa, Mississauga, Brampton, and Oshawa, those courts are completely offline. Smaller ones may be different. So part of what we're doing is in the early, in September, we'll be working with all of our local committees and hearing what each courthouse thinks they can support. And we'll have information out about that as soon as we can. But I hope folks understand that we felt we couldn't support something where we are potentially taking large groups of kids into indoor environments and school buses and things like that. I'm not exactly sure what the guidelines are going to be around excursions, but that was the decision that we made. Lastly, we have the provincial mock trial competition. So this is the OOCMT that many people take part in. As we have it right now, we're going ahead with this as planned. So it's the same timelines, the same schedule. We should have a scenario out in late fall. And you will be able to register and do all of the things that you normally do. We're acting like that because we're hoping for the best and thinking we might have a real chance to do some kind of more conventional in-person schooling in the second term when most of this takes place. But that's just sort of where we are for now. Now let's see what else we've got here. Other stuff that we've got going on. So in terms of professional development, we have an entire menu of professional development options. This is like training on the Charter Challenge, training on how to do mock trials, different resource-based things, including walkthroughs of the resources that we've talked about today and the programs. We're able to do all of this through Zoom at this point. So we're actually hoping that we get to do a little more PD than we had in the past, because hopefully that'll make it a little bit more accessible if people can do it at times that are more convenient to them. So we will, if possible, if the physical thing works out, we'll be doing in person, but if not, we have virtual and we have pre-recorded as well. So one of the things that we've talked about has been sort of the realization that the webinar series that we've done at this point was actually pretty easy to do, and is actually a pretty great way of being able to respond to emerging legal issues and controversies. So we're planning to do at least a couple of these through the year as bonus PD events for teachers, and we'll let everybody know about that. We have Access to Justice Week, which is coming up in October. So we have a slate of activities sitting around that. I want to quickly take a look at one thing, because we're planning to do what is a really neat thing called a Twitter Moot. This has come to us largely from the Hamilton OJEN committee. So we thank them for helping us, showing us the way there. I just want to quickly show you a little bit about what this looks like. So let's find us here. Okay, so this is the Twitter page for the Hamilton Justice Education Network. Obviously, they didn't do this in the spring of last year because, you know, but this is their Twitter mood here. This is basically the structure of it. Is a legal question is released. The question in 2019 was, should Canadians have a reasonable expectation of privacy in electronic messages, such as texts, even after they have been sent and received? So this went directly to one of the cases at the time. It's very simple. It's going to be administered centrally, probably through OJEN, but it's going to be engaged through the local committees. So there will be opportunities in local regions to join in that way, but we'll also make it available for anybody who doesn't have that going in their region through the central office. You receive a hashtag and a handle, and students just tweet their arguments, and the best arguments are reviewed, and you'll see people will shout out different stuff that gets called out. The winners are going to get, at this time, they got a sit-down lunch, so we're trying to think about what an appropriate prize would be given the constraints. So we have people making arguments. Here we have here from St. Thomas More in Hamilton. So the right to security is extended to everyone, even the general population in prisons. How can you ensure the protection of these prisoners from dangerous ones? So I actually think that's answering a question from a different year. Yeah, 2018, yeah. Anyway, that's how that sort of works. So we're going to be doing a large sort of festive and fun competition in that way in October. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for the stuff that I was going to talk about. The last thing is really the crown jewel and the really neatest thing we've done this year, and it's been all Michelle, so I'm going to leave that with her. Microphone, my dear.
Every time. Okay, so again, this is another one where if you've been with us for a while, you've heard us talk about the Access to Justice game before. So if you haven't already heard about this, This is a simulation game we designed a number of years ago that is about introducing students to the environment of legal service provision in Ontario in both its paid and free and informational elements, and starting to get them to think about access to justice, including access to legal services and what it really means as a system and as a society that it can be so darn hard for people to get the legal support that they need. So historically, the way this has worked, and this is still a way that we 100% support you in running the Access to Justice game when you're back in class, is using paper. So with paper printouts of role-playing packages for some students who will be playing as people who have common legal problems, instructional packages for people who are going to be playing legal service providers, people like Legal Aid Ontario, or staff at a courthouse, or staff at a law firm, and then all these other things as well. Little chance cards that sort of need to be cut out in advance. There is a little bit of assembly involved in the paper version. We tried to make it as simple as possible, but there is just a little bit of stuff there. And also with the paper version, we were finding that it can be a little bit demanding on the facilitator or the teacher, because when you're presenting this sort of game, one of the key functions of the game and one of the key learning tools is frustration, and students getting in and finding that, okay, I don't have enough money for a lawyer, I also make too much money for legal aid, this clinic can't help me, the courthouse told me to go here, the library told me to go this other place. And so it's all that stuff is very literally modeled after the real life services and constraints on all those different organizations. You know, that's the real income limit on legal aid. That's really what the community legal clinics can and can't do. And so it needs a facilitator or a teacher who knows that stuff really well, who can handle those questions and sort of explain about how exactly does legal aid work? What's the difference between Legal Aid Ontario and a community legal clinic? What's duty counsel at a courthouse? What do they actually really specifically do? And that's really challenging. That's something that plenty of people graduate law school without knowing. There's plenty of lawyers working in private practice who have no idea the nuances of how legal aid works. So this led us to the idea that we should create a digital version of this game. And the main animating reason why we wanted to do this is because if we have control of the programming, we can automate so much of this stuff. We can automate things about legal aid limits and the flow of play, and not be depending on students to read a bunch of rules and really internalize them and really follow them really particularly. No one's cutting out chance cards. So we've really tried to streamline this, and I think you'll hopefully see that reflected in all the different elements of this game online, and also, importantly, the very streamlined teacher's guide we have produced for it. So let me show you a couple things. These are some of the features of the online game, which I will show you in just a second. So we still have character selection, where we have our 3 scenarios. If you've used the Access to Justice game with your class, we still have Jean for family law, Jamie for employment law, and Dallas for housing law. So 3 very common areas for people to have legal problems. We have full art for these locations. Our developments and art are done by 2 independent game creators and artists working out of Montreal and BC. So they actually, I think, look pretty good, especially as educational or like nonprofit organization created games go. They can be a little embarrassing. We have automated scripts. We have those random events still here. And some things that are very useful are we have an automated money tracker and a day counter. So instead of students, getting these sort of randomized event cards that say, okay, now you have $150 more than you had before, and your student going, I forget how much money I had before. What does this mean? What am I, all of that is hard coded in. So all of that, sort of burden is just automated by the game. And as I said, we have a new streamlined teacher's guide, which there is still a lot of good content in the older one, which we're going to keep available because there's so much good background information there. But I do want to show you the new format that we have because I think it's going to be really practical and really useful. So let me show you this game. Okay, you should be in my browser now. Hopefully that worked. Okay, so this is the front page of the Access to Justice game, ojen.ca/game. This is also linked in the teaching resources section that Nat showed you. We have the online game and the teacher's guide, both linked from here. So let me show you the teacher's guide first. So I think the old version was something like 20 pages. This one is divided into 4 sections and it's under 10. So the first section is the teacher's overview, which is sort of stuff that you would want to know before you start using it in your class. So things like curriculum lengths, time period, what you need, a short summary of how the game actually works, some companion and extension activity suggestions. And we have an indexed list of how to win. So if you need to refer back to this, like if your students are asking, well, what is this person supposed to do? You have it all right there. The next big section is this backgrounder we put together on access to justice in Ontario. So this includes some updated content from the previous one, which I think was written in 2016, I'm gonna say. So it's just streamlined for format. There's some updated figures. There's some more detailed explanations. And I think this is something that is really important and we're really happy to be able to offer. It has this whole section on understanding the legal aid system in Ontario. So this is an overview of exactly the different ways that legal aid provides services, what each of them do, how the income caps work, how you access them, all that stuff. So we're actually giving you 100% of the information that you need in advance. There are these notes about funding and cutoffs, including how to look up the most current information on legal aid cutoffs. I'll say they change really, really regularly. So, you know, the night before you're going to do this or on your way to class, it can be worth just popping up like, okay, what are the rates right now? Because they fluctuate just a little bit. And some notes about Pro Bono Ontario and the lawyer referral service. So that's all there. We've also tried to write this backgrounder at a level where it's primarily for you, but if you have a class, especially of grade 12s or a pretty high reading level, grade 11 class, this is also totally something you could just give to your students. Next, we have this in-class guide. So this is just one page double-sided, 2 pages, that is sort of the beats of how we introduce this game with all the answers as well. So this is another thing that we're correcting from an earlier version where we would say, explain how legal aid works, to keep using that example, but we wouldn't give you the breakdown of how legal aid works. We were just like, you know how legal aid works. So now we've got all that listed out. So it's right at your fingertips. You've got, you know, the most common reasons why people don't end up getting a lawyer, the exact cost of what civil legal services cost on average for relatively simple trials, which is $13,000 to $37,000, which is really striking. Statistics about how common civil legal problems are, and information or a place to update the information about legal aid cutoffs. And then on the back, we have instructions for playing the game that are very easy to read out beat by beat. We have discussion questions that you can use to prompt your class to reflect on their experience after they're done playing the game, with some notes about how you might want to probe them to deepen their learning. And then the last section of this guide is a 1-page student worksheet. This easy can be copy-pasted and modified to use online, but essentially, if you want to assign this game as homework, or if you want them to do it in small groups and have something to work on together, they can log who they're playing as, they can log whether they got success, where they went, sort of what happened, and answer a couple of pretty simple sort of reflective prompts. So how did you get success? Who helped you? Would you be happy with the outcome you got? A really important thing with this game is because it's about access to justice, not necessarily winning your case. So we define winning, or like the end, as getting the help you need to make sure that your case is going to get heard fairly by the legal mechanisms that are there to resolve that kind of issue. So for example, it's for the family law case, it might be, you know, getting your papers formally filed so that you can get your custody arrangement figured out. It's not necessarily perfecting that process. So asking them to reflect on, would you be happy with this outcome? Is the story over? And a little bit of a short research task about identifying legal aid in your community. So that's the teaching resource. Let me show you the game. Okay. I'm gonna blast through a couple of functions of this just because I want to show you how to work with it. So this is the title screen. We click, we've got our 3-player options. I'm gonna choose Jean, who's got the family law scenario, just because she's first. So this is a beta version of the game. We have a final version coming in next week. And one of the things that I want to note, on top of some little, typo resolution and stuff, we are upgrading to a font that is a little bit easier to read. So just keep that in mind. We know this font works with the Vibe, but it's not the most user-friendly. So we have, I'm not going to read this all out because I want to make sure we have time for questions, but we have a bit of a story about Jean separating from her partner, Pat, who takes their kids and leaves. So here's the sort of main atrium of the game. Jean has a lot of options. Who should she talk to next? We have this counter at the top, so we're on day 1. Jean has $800 in her pocket, and we have these different options of where she can go. So there's the courthouse, a community center, a law firm, a community legal clinic, and then she has some options at home. I am going to choose the community center, just so you can see a different, so we've got this background. Jean visits the local community center where a bunch of community organizations have offices. There's a reception desk inside the front doors. She goes up to the counter. So we have, instead of students having to role play this out or just walls of text, we have these nice character animations and sort of a little bit of a back and forth conversation between our characters. I'm gonna fast forward through this without reading it all. But again, just like the paper version, this all follows really closely what actually would be offered at any of these stations. Okay, so she gets a referral from Legal Aid Ontario. Now these screens, after each visit to a location to try to get legal help, your student will get one of these randomized life events. Sometimes they add money, sometimes they take away money. Money is a really important mechanic in this game because, of course, what you can afford makes a really big difference. And so these are all automated. You'll get these randomly and they won't repeat. So again, I'm gonna skip through this. This is a little bit of a reading intensive resource for OJEN. I think that just is what it is. So it's just something to know when you're deciding if this is right for your class. But it does move pretty quickly. So in this one, that chance event gave us $200 extra, so now it's day 2, and we have $1,000 in our pocket instead. So this is the basic loop. I might choose next to go to the community legal clinic or the courthouse. I'm gonna get, depending on where I've been and what I've got and who I've talked to, I'm gonna get different options from each. There's different characters who can help me at each one. And I'm gonna work towards getting a lawyer, getting the paperwork done or whatever I need so that I can get in the door of the justice system and start working towards a legal resolution to my issue. So that's the Access to Justice game in a nutshell. At the end, you're gonna get a little summary of what an overview of these types of cases and a little reflection prompt and the option to start over and do it again. So on average, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes usually to get through one full run of this game. So it's sort of at the level where if you have 20 minutes, some students will get through it twice, some will get through it once with a lot of clicks. But it's a nice little self-contained ecosystem now that we'll continue making improvements to. So I think that is it for the Access to Justice game. I want to just pull us right back to the PowerPoint for a second, because I do want to acknowledge the Law Foundation of Ontario for their support, both with the Summer Law Institute and also both the Access to Justice game and Art in the Courts. They have been an incredible source of support on these pretty technically challenging projects, and we just appreciate it so immensely. So I think that's it for stuff we have to show you this year. I don't know if there have been any questions come in. I'm gonna just stop my share right now, but we can talk about whatever you want at this point. I don't know if we've had questions rolling in.
We can give it another minute.
Sure.
Come up, but,
Sure.
you know, you say the online version of the game is text heavy, but that's probably the thing that's improved the most from the paper game.
Yeah.
Is the removal of the requirement for students to suddenly figure out what they have to do as a service provider.
Yeah.
That in was the smartest part of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is also a lot of pedagogical value, I think, in actually giving students time and space to do that learning of what a service provider actually does. And I know there have been some teachers who have done some interesting setup projects around this, where they like assign roles a day in advance, and then before the next class, students are asked to do some research into either like the organization that they're role playing as, or the issue that they're supposed to be playing as a litigant. And so there's some interesting extension opportunities there that I guess you could do with the digital one as well, but it just isn't quite the same. We have an anonymous question that I see here, which is the teacher's guide with answers loaded online, and is it password protected? It is online. It's linked from the online resources link that we showed at the beginning, and I think Christy put it in chat. It's not password protected, so you can just go in there, you can take it, it's yours. And I think I saw someone raise their hand. It might, I think we have people muted by default. So if you can type your question or comment into the Q&A, we'll pick it up that way. I'd love to hear it. Oh, because the students can find it too. I see. Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I think in this case, we're not, so we don't have an answer key for the student worksheet, for example, because the answers will be specific to their playthrough. Like, you can't really cheat sheet what was the path that you took to get your success, or what do you think your character would, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not really a risk of students finding that one in advance. And the other stuff is just fact sheets, like it's things that you could just give them in the first place. So hopefully that won't be too much of a barrier, because we want to kind of keep things as accessible as possible. But fair enough about the concern. Any other questions? I mean, also, of course, as boards announce things, as the situation develops, we'll be making more announcements about what we're doing in response to COVID and changing classroom conditions. I think most of you probably are signed up for our teachers newsflash emails, but that'll be the main way that we communicate, and you'll see blog posts and Twitter posts and stuff like that. We have a question come in and said, great job with the justice game. Do you have an audio read button for IEP student accommodations? We don't. But if I remember correctly, and I will actually have to check with our developers on this, I think it's optimized on the back end for screen readers. So I think that we included descriptive text or alt text behind the images, and the text itself is readable by those. So I think the answer, we don't have an audio read version, partially because that just was going to open such a world of other stuff that we have to do, honestly, that was sort of outside the budget and time that we had. But we have made some options to make sure that if you're using assistive technology, I think it's supposed to work. Can it be paused so they can read at their own pace? Yes. I actually was clicking through to make it advance. By default, when you go to the next screen, it'll sort of populate itself, and it won't move until you click it. So you have all the time in the world. You can go get a drink, go to the washroom, come back, it'll still be there.
Okay. Well, if we don't have anything else, and it looks like we don't, then I think we can call this one and say thanks again to all of you folks for attending. It's really lovely.
Yeah.
It's great to see your names. We're thinking about you as you go back to school. We're always here as we are, so nothing really on the educator support side has really changed too much. It's pretty much business as usual, except we're all at home now instead of at the office. So from all of us, we wish you the absolute best in whatever your work looks like this term. And we're really looking forward to working with you. Thanks very much. Take care.